As Shub has indicated, my name is Max. My surname is Bolkwana, and I'm a farmer. So the discussion, as you can understand, will be a practical one. But after all is said and done, we have to come back to the basics. That before we talk about technology, before we talk about data, before we talk about philosophy, before we talk about politics or history, we must eat first. So our discussion is the most basic, but this basic need for humanity is not always available for all of our citizens, especially in the developing countries. This will be much more pronounced in the reports that Kirill will give at this point, indicating the levels of food insecurity, especially in the African continent, which has been exacerbated by the ongoing conflicts, by extreme weather conditions, by the levels of indebtedness, by the backward methods of food production, but lately, the disruption with respect to fertilizer. As I've indicated, that our session will be focused on practical approaches in terms of how we're going to deal with these issues. But before we get reflections from my team, the Minister of Agriculture in South Africa, who was supposed to be part of our panel, has sent us a message through the video. If my colleagues at the back can start with that message, and then we will proceed with our discussions going forward. Thanks.
Program Director, President Mbeki, our patron of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, panelists, researchers, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and privilege that I have been given an opportunity to make reflections on this important report that has been done, which aims, no doubt, to contribute to the global debate on food security and how we can position our countries to respond better to the shocks that sometimes affect our capacity and capability to fight hunger and thereby poverty. I must from the onset apologize for not being there physically owing to unforeseen circumstances. Program Director, ladies and gentlemen, I've deliberately framed my reflections on the global food security challenges with some emphasis on the African challenge. I do so because global shifts that occur as a result of conflicts, pandemics, and climate change tend to have a notable impact on food value chains. The impact and response will differ depending on strength of policy response and regulatory environments of countries. It might be important for me to just share some lessons learned during the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic showed us that responsive policy frameworks avoided situations of large-scale food insecurity. In the African Union, for instance, the Specialized Technical Committee on Agriculture, Rural Development, Water and Environment ensured that member states intervene in such a way that agricultural production needed to continue within the sector, having been classified as essential. Secondly, trade among and within countries needed to continue to open their borders to allow for trade on agricultural goods to support food security. Flexibility and innovation of a permitting system ensured that these can be done with minimal risk. Communications and policy coherence showed its importance during this period. Africa was able to draw from its CAADP framework and look at how these policy frameworks can be utilized as countries build back better from COVID-19 pandemic. Program Director, the Ukraine-Russia war, from which this research had to be commissioned, came at a critical point as countries were rebuilding. The examination of this phenomenon was important as it shows the global connectedness of our economies. The responses by a number of countries on this conflict showed the vulnerability of our food systems. There are approaches that have been taken by the United Nations, such as the Black Sea Deal, that was aimed to allow countries even the ones that are in conflict, to assist in the movement of agricultural goods so as to avoid a global food challenge. The lack of clarity on sanctions of agricultural goods also meant countries feared for secondary sanctions if they were to continue agricultural trade and exchange with the countries in conflict. It is for this reason that I agree with this report when it advocates for the removal of agriculture from sanctions. The long-term view on this matter is the local policy space that countries have to continue their productive capacity if they have to survive. It also calls for engagement and partnerships between government and non-government organizations. Another noteworthy point the report raised is the importance of building Africa's fertilizer production capability. We cannot see significant improvement in agriculture while we are exposed to global fertilizer shocks. A number of countries such as Tanzania, Nigeria, and South Africa are already investing in improving their productive capacity in this regard. This needs increased focus. We also need to embrace better seeds and genetics in Africa broadly as catalysts for agricultural productivity. The benefits of better seeds are clear in South Africa's case and in Zambia, where crop yields have improved notably over time, thus being able to improve household food security. Here at home, the implementation of the Agriculture Agro-Processing Master Plan creates a policy space where government not only works with the private sector, but it can actually partner with communities and labor. This also looks to a dedicated commodity in which partnership can go a long way to contribute to policy. But parties can partner in implementation. Allow me, therefore, to appreciate the work that has been done in producing this report, which will further strengthen our local and global food value chains. I thank you.
Thank you very much. The report that the minister is talking about, it's a report that was commissioned by the Thabo Mbeki Foundation to seek to understand the extent of food security, in particular in our continent. Thankfully, one of the senior researchers that has worked with us on that report is Kirill Masalov, who will highlight some of the findings and the data behind those findings in terms of that report.
Max, thank you so much, and dear audience, thank you so much for this opportunity to present this very important report on these distinguished conversations. We worked on this report for almost half a year in a very close cooperation between Thabo Mbeki Foundation and Andrey Melnichenko Foundation. And what we looked at the food security from the standpoint of the fertilizer market. So as the first step, we took a very careful look at the flows of the fertilizers, at what happened in the market in the last 2 years. And we found, first of all, that it was a huge redistribution of the flows. So all the classical routes were disturbed. And the second is that it was a huge amount of fertilizers. It amounted to 40 million tons just disappeared from the market. Just to give you understanding how large this is, this amount of fertilizers enough to grow the grain to feed 500 million people. So it is a huge, tremendous catastrophe for the market. And we then take a deeper look at the regions and found out that also it's not just was even change in the market. It was the sub-Saharan Africa which was hit the most, because all the fertilizers which removed from the market, they were first of all removed from Africa and from the Asian countries. Then we tried to understand why this happened, and we took a deeper look into the factors behind this. What we found out is that almost half of the volumes can be easily attributed to some objective factors like what Max mentioned, so market disruptions, drought, conflicts, etc. but the other half can be clearly attributed to the sanctions, which is also not a big surprise, because we know that we have sanctions on the fertilizers from Russia and Belarus, potash. But in the same time, what was insightful here, that a huge chunk of this reduction was due to the personal sanctions, which were raised on the individuals, which were related to the fertilizer industry. And then we asked ourselves why this happened. Why these sanctions, which were meant not to hit any food security in any of the regions, why they hit the most vulnerable countries. And it appeared that there is no clear procedure, that there are no clear formulas or models or whatever to assess the collateral damage from the sanctions. And as a result, this reduction of the fertilizers, so it basically, what happened, the farmers which can afford this, so the farmers with a huge margin, the farmers with the access to financing, so this is first of all the farmers from the global north, they managed to get the fertilizers in this deficit, but the vulnerable countries did not manage. So the result of this is truly catastrophic. First of all, why we are talking about fertilizers here? So we built a model which is very related and coincides in its conclusions with the model built by the GRO agency. It is the agency funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is also the commissioners of these conversations. So we understood that 1 ton of fertilizers, we estimated how much grain you can grow from this amount of fertilizers, how much calories it can give, and in the end, how much people you can feed. And then we looked at the humanitarian and the economic consequences of this deficit. So first of all, it's people. We have more than 20 million people added in the previous year in sub-Saharan Africa alone, and this now amounts to 23% of the population of the region, which is crazy. Also, we have seen that the Asia was hit a lot, and in particular the Indian subcontinent. So here the numbers are even larger in absolute terms. If we talk about poverty, we have seen in the region alone the rise of the poverty of plus 40 million people in sub-Saharan Africa alone. Estimated damage done to the farmers is $20 billion annually. So because of the lack of access of fertilizers, we have the yields growing, the land becomes more and more depressed, and local farmers, they face these losses every year. Also, we have seen the rise in the food price, and this hit the pockets of the common citizen of the Africa, which we estimated to be a huge number. It's $70 billion. So this basically concludes our analytical and market finding, and we believe that something has to be done to prevent this from happening and to cure the damage which is already done.
Thank you very much, Cyril. One of the recommendations from the report is actually the need for the use of technology to be able to close the huge digital divide as far as food production is concerned. And Lydia from the National Security in the US administration has done extensive work in this regard, and she will share what sort of those technologies that we can look at to make sure that we meet our targets of ending poverty by 2030.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to be here. As a consultant for the Joint Special Operations University, I wrote a report on food security and special operations. What we found is that there are many intertwined components inside the food security problem. But just speaking to the technology bits, I'd like to highlight 4 technologies that I think are a big part of the food security divide, technology divide. So one is mechanized harvesting and seed planting. The second one is smart agriculture. Smart agriculture features artificial intelligence, drones, robotics, cloud infrastructure, and connected sensors. Number 3 is new methods of exploring how to do agriculture, such as hydroponic, aeroponic, vertical farming. And then 4 is the advances in DNA editing with seeds to make seeds drought-proof. This is going to be an important aspect in mitigating and managing the climate change. And then 5th, which I find quite interesting and advanced, is the new methods for satellite agricultural monitoring. I spoke with a company that works on hyperspectral satellite imaging, which is basically images from satellites that are able to see through plants and be able to see how much nutrition they are absorbing. And this is in turn to be able to monitor from space all of the fields. So these are the technology divides that I see growing that I think we should address.
Thank you very much. And then we're going to come to Professor Renato Flores. He has indicated that agriculture is a practical subject, and he wants to share with us some of the practical examples in response to the crisis that Kirill was talking about.
Thank you very much. Because you know, when we come to meetings like this, we listen to a lot of one must, one should, one needs to. And so when you come home, it's as if you had visited several medical doctors and you come home with a long list of prescriptions. Take 5 investment pills every morning, 1 teaspoonful of climate finance, eat more technology, sleep digitally, and practice every day 10 green push-ups and a lot of innovation aerobics. Well, in my small think tank, we try to go to concrete examples, as the chairman said. So I'm going to present 3 examples which take place in Africa. We are in Africa. And of course, if I'm going to present the examples, I have to name the agents. But I'm not doing propaganda, and I'm not claiming that these are miraculous solutions. Not even perfect, but only that they go in the right direction. That's my purpose, to try to study and publicize examples that can help us to address the main issue of our session or panel. Well, you know that Africa, you have about at least 100 million people who have no access to food. They are unable to put food on the table, despite the fact that in the continent you find 60% of unused arable land in the planet. Africa imports 85% of the food it consumes. And among these imports, you find wheat, maize, rice, and soya beans. So the situation must change. Many people studied the causes of this problem. There are a few of them. I'm going to concentrate in one, which is low productivity. African agriculture has very low productivity and also poor use and poor management of the soil and problems with fertilizers. So I move to the examples which address this issue. First example, you know that Morocco is very well endowed in phosphate, which is a key input for fertilizers. Well, OCP, which is the organization which controls the business of phosphate in Morocco, has signed an agreement with the World Bank, and together they are supplying fertilizers and fertilizer technology to West Africa. They hope to improve the technology of 5 million farmers, which is a lot. It's very interesting because together with better access to fertilizers, they do a mapping of the soil and try to identify the best fertilizer for that crop and that kind of soil, as they call customized fertilizing. Also, within this initiative, they are going to build up a regional center for soil health and fertility management. So this example is very interesting because it combines the technology with the funds and empowers the local farmers to produce better and acquire knowledge and technology. Second example, intra-trade in Africa, depending on how you compute it, it's between 14 to 16% of the whole African trade. Well, this is too low, and one of the things you can do is to dynamize, increase trade between African countries in food. Recently, it was signed a very important free trade agreement, which is the African Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement. And one of the purposes of it is exactly to increase the amount of intra-trade, especially food. But then you need money. Well, the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, which is a bank which uses finance which comes from outside the region, okay, and was initially addressed to the countries in Africa which were closer to the Arabic culture, has opened up a very interesting funding line in which they fund equity, pre-equity, and debt funding for small agricultural business. Also, they try to help them with finance to get into value chains and improve exactly intra-African trade. You think that why they only trade 14 to 16%? Because there still are a lot of non-tariff barriers, and also there is a problem in payments. You have different currencies, you have exchange rate volatilities, and transfers are very expensive. So one of the lines developed by the Arab Bank is to lower the cost of the payment transactions. So it's an interesting, very simple initiative, but address concrete problems. Third and last example comes from my country. In my country, we have a top applied agriculture institution which is called Embrapa. Embrapa has developed several technologies for tropical agriculture, improving crops and related things. So Embrapa has the technology, needs the funds. So the example is similar to the first one, which in development cooperation is called trilateral cooperation. So Embrapa allies with providers of funds. One of the examples, it's not the only one. For instance, Japan, through their Minister of International Trade and Investment, they have an agreement with the Embrapa, and they fund agricultural development in new areas, remember the 60%, in new areas in Africa, in which Japan puts the money, Embrapa brings the technology, they study the soil, they devise the best crop for the soil, and they train the farmers. They have a system, a very interesting system of mini labs in which you put a lab in an area where you have several plantations and crops, and the mini lab helps them to analyze productivity, to see how are the seeds, what you can locally improve and all that. This is another very simple example and which has been very successful in a few African countries. Of course, when you do this, whenever there's another problem, as the chairman knows, whenever you deal with unused land, you have property right problems. This is another problem with African agriculture, which is not, I'm not going to address. But I just want to highlight the three examples as three positive initiatives. We talk about so many sad and awful things that I think it's important also to transmit, to publicize positive initiatives, very simple, that should be replicated and also should encourage other institutions to create their own concrete solutions. Thank you very much.
Prof, thank you very much for your provocation. I just want to go back to my other two panelists before I allow everybody to speak and with further provocations. Prof has raised the issue that Africa is home to 60% of the arable land, but it is also home to the potassium salts, it's home to the nitrogen, it's home to the phosphates. But as we sit here today, the average fertilizer per hectare in Africa is 21% against the world average of 46. But you end up with some of the embarrassing things where you see the queue of leaders from Africa asking President Putin for grain. How then can we make the partnerships work to make sure that we redress what Professor has just spoken about?
Max, thank you. I would actually separate my answer into two questions, into two parts here. So the first one is the strategic question. It's important that Africa becomes self-sufficient on these items. So as a striking example, among all the crises which I described in my session, we can see that, for example, Nigerian nitrogen fertilizers, they actually increased the export to the Europe when Africa was suffering from the lack of this fertilizer. And but another part is actually we need to think about the damage which is already done. This clearly described in the report. And here we believe that our report should be discussed further on other platforms, and with the help of our valued partners, Thabo Mbeki Foundation, we believe there are some ways to move it further to cure the damage which is already done. Thank you, Max.
So my company is called Abundance Studio because I have an abundance mindset, and I want to apply that to your question. So you talked about aid and you talked about partnerships. I think that when we look at food security and the amount of problems it brings in terms of migration and food insecurity, there's a lot of opportunity with technology, but also strategic partnerships and strategic aid. What I mean by strategic aid is grains perhaps may not be strategic, but what could be strategic is an exchange of knowledge to help grow the next generation. Specific mechanized tools to make agriculture more efficient. This can help people create more harvests on their own without having to receive aid of that kind in the future. And then in terms of partnerships, I really think that there's a huge opportunity to bring knowledge into the country and also labs to experiment in the context, for example, of South Africa or other countries in Africa. And in this sense, again, looking at the youth and thinking how is the next generation of farmers going to be created with the new tools, digital, technological, et cetera. So I think strategic partnerships in those spaces are going to be key.
Could I add something? Just, we should not forget, I was talking about the shoulds. One should not forget that also a few African countries are able to locally produce the fertilizer, provided they have input and a little financial help. In the first example, World Bank and OCP is going to supply also the phosphate, so one of the key inputs for local production of the fertilizer, which is not the whole solution, but also helps to diminish the dependence.
Prof, thank you very much. From the audience, is there any one or two intelligent questions that can be posed to my panelists?
Hi, my name is Amina Bajwa, and I'm from Pakistan, and I work in agriculture, design projects for the government. My question to the panel is that we've talked about fertilizer, and we also realize that fertilizer reduces or degrades the soil health. In your view, what is the potential for organic fertilizer, if any, at a mass scale? And secondly, your thoughts on regenerative or sustainable agriculture. Thanks.
So for the first question, for the organic fertilizers, so basically there is an estimation done by the UN which says that if all the world forgets the mineral fertilizers, abandon them at all, the half of the population of the world will not be fed. So it definitely should be developed. So there should be steps taken into improving the application of the organic fertilizers, but in the near or the midterm, there is no alternative to the mineral fertilizers.
Prof, I would like you to respond to that question as well, but let's take the second question.
Thank you very much for this excellent discussion. Geopolitical question, since we have a Russian and Brazilian participant, and we have a very important year with Russia hosting the next BRICS and Brazil hosting the next G20 summit. Are we going to witness the new, let's say, commodities powerhouse block that would be the BRICS plus block starting with next year, similar to what we saw with OPEC, which was and still is a powerful block for energy commodities, but now food commodities will be, of course, the big thing of this in the next decade. So are we going to witness a new powerful food commodities block with BRICS plus, given the fact that Brazil, Russia, India are really very important food producers or exporters, and China is practically the biggest importer of this commodity? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to add another thing on the question, part of the issues raised in the report is the fact that the sanctions jurisprudence excludes generally the humanitarian support and food and agricultural inputs. And part of what has happened around this Ukraine war is that, unfortunately, the food inputs and even some of the humanitarian support is also part of the sanctions regime. I would like to have your comment on that, but answer that question specifically about how is Brazil going to lead us to have a better world around this food issue?
Well, if I understood, because you are addressing complex issues. So I'll say a few words about Brazil, and then I will address very quickly the question of the sanctions. Well, Brazil has a unique agricultural model. It's very specific, and of course, it's the outcome of our resources, the development of our technology, and our capabilities. We don't want, Brazil is very careful with this, we don't want to reproduce our model. We don't try to do this. The examples I mentioned, and the third one, are examples we are worried, we appreciate, we like, we endeavor, we have an endeavor to transfer knowledge. The model is another thing, because we have, for some crops, for instance, for soybean, it's true we are a powerhouse, but it's a model which, as any model, has a good side and has a less good side, but it's a model that works. But we don't want to transfer, we don't impose, we don't suggest models. I think what's important in our discussion is to transfer, and this is related to technology, as she said, is to transfer knowledge, so that a farmer in Ghana develops his solution, but he has the capacity to do this. Another in Nigeria will develop another solution, and in South Africa you have another solution. So Brazil is very careful with this. We don't want to lead, we don't want to impose models, but we are happy, we think it's, we are obliged to transfer knowledge for humanitarian and for the good of mankind. Regarding sanctions, I think you are opening not a window, you are opening a very large door. Well, I personally, I still work, I work in trade also, I'm against sanctions. I think sanctions do not work, mainly, and in the end, as my old grandmother would say, in the end, the one who suffers is the poor, is the people, because the powerful, they can bypass the sanctions, but the people suffers. So my point, but this is, I have an argument, this is a long argument, I am against sanctions, with the exception of a few well-targeted things. I think sanctions do not work, and I think also sanctions are unfair. I don't think sanctions are fair. And many of the nowadays sanctions, they break international law. This is another thing. They are illegal. So sanctions is a problem. But as you said, well, fertilizers, they are humanitarian aid. People need food, and to grow food, they need fertilizers. So there must be an effort, and then here I think there should be a joint effort to provide aid and to provide the means so that international conflict doesn't damage the flow of food inputs. This is difficult, but I think here there should be joint action to take food out of sanctions. If you agree with sanctions, sanctions is another discussion, I think food should be outside. I think it's unfair, and many times it is illegal. It must be warned of.
Thank you very much, Prof. Lydia, I think it's quite clear these matters are complex, but I just want to ask an unfair question. What will be your parting shot that will leave a positive view that this crisis or pending crisis of food security can be solved?
Yes, it is a very complicated issue. I think that there are more people who want good things than bad things. And so just as you pointed out about the nationalities on the panel, I believe that I don't think that the American people or the Russian people want war or suffering, and I hope that we all get back to putting all of our energy in the food security issue. That said, I think that the civilian population wants to improve their lives. They want jobs. They want to be able to put food on the table. And so I think that there is a huge incentive to create partnerships of value to both sides. And so that's kind of where I see the opportunity. Universities thinking about jobs for the next generation, education for the next generation, and public-private partnerships, so thinking about companies. Companies also need to collaborate with universities, and every single company in every single country needs people in their labor force. And so I think there's incentive to do good. So it can be gloom and doom, but I do think that there's incentive driving us forward.
Excellent. I think a similar question to you, Kirill. What is your parting shot?
Sorry?
What is your last message?
So for the report, as I have already said, so we are very proud to work with you. We are very fascinated with the catastrophic events which we have found in this report, and we do hope to continue to discuss it on different platforms and bring it to another level with the help of your distinguished foundation, Max.
Thanks. Prof, in my culture, the last word is normally left for gray-haired people. So in terms of taking this discussion forward, how do we make sure that it becomes one of the central issues in the agenda of G20 as Brazil is going to be taking over in the next year?
I fully agree. And we've been discussing climate change, green technology, green finance, that's all very important. But as I said this about 1 week ago in Abu Dhabi, without food, you can't be green. The first thing is to eat. You need clean air, oxygen to breathe, and then you need food. So I think sometimes the priority has been reverted. So my message is, let us put food first, and then we have the other problems. The other problems are very important, are crucial, but food comes before. It's more important. That's the message.
Prof, thank you very much. You've been such a disciplined panel. Thanks a lot for your insights, and I think this discussion is going to continue until the next G20. Thanks a lot.